It's going to be a trouble.
Stop.
Just 1 second, just there's some noise. So Bilal John, can you hold for now?
It's already started, Louis, and we have 40 attendees watching us.
Okay. Okay, right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, welcome to this first event of a webinar series by the Heart of Asia Society on Afghanistan and the Heart of Asia region, now and beyond. I am Javed Ludin. I'm the president of the Heart of Asia Society, and I'm moderating this event. Afghanistan is once again in deep crisis of multiple dimensions, from state collapse to humanitarian catastrophe, from political turmoil at home to potential threat to regional and global security. Afghanistan today is in the eye of a perfect storm. After months of being awestruck into numbness, we are all beginning to respond to an extremely dire situation in what's basically a failure at so many levels. 6 months on from taking over power to a military victory, the Taliban have proven unprepared to govern a country of 35 million people with a complex history in a diverse society. A new generation of activists has emerged on the ground, and despite heavy-handed crackdown, they have kept the streets of Kabul and other large cities occupied with civic protest of a kind not seen before. To compound the feeling of tragedy, most Afghans have an intense sense of deja vu about the current situation. Afghan history is strewn with many failed attempts at building a state and achieving a life of like a normal society, a life of dignity and a life of peace. For the past decades, Afghanistan has rolled from one war to another. The end of one chapter of violence has been a precursor of the next. And every time, the vicious cycle has brought more poverty, broken institutions, more isolation, and more desperation. Are we yet again at the end of one war and the beginning of another? This is a question that's important and that's on the mind of all Afghans, but it's a question that the Taliban would be better advised to keep in mind before it's too late. Outside Afghanistan, responses to the Taliban have been highly varied, from political apathy to diplomatic boldness. Regional countries are understandably concerned in trying to do what they think is an appropriate response at this stage, and that is, for many, engaging the Taliban or giving them the benefit of the doubt. However, if anyone thought that the departure of the United States from Afghanistan would help the region forge a common approach to Afghanistan and to its future, then sadly that has not happened. Western powers, on the other hand, who were disengaged very abruptly after the events of August, engage. The recent, and much appears to be going on behind the scene. The recent Oslo meeting was a watershed moment that brought the engagement agenda to the public eye. The dilemma of engaging the Taliban appears to be more agonizing for the West than it is for the region. And there is no coherent answer. to what engagement with the Taliban should look like, what it should entail, and what it should not entail. There is much that unites the world in the region about the future of Afghanistan. The humanitarian situation is one, and a shared consent for security and potential challenges that might emanate from Afghanistan is another. However, there is generally no agreement on format to engage and to coordinate. Although the role of the UN, as an example, is something that enjoys broad support, at least as far as the humanitarian crisis is concerned. In the absence of a state-to-state relationship, the onus is on the UN and the international NGOs to respond to the humanitarian crisis right now. While much is being discussed these days in dialogues, debates, op-eds, and rather unhelpfully through divisive social media exchanges, there is room for sober, analytical, and more result-oriented conversation on Afghanistan. What could be done to help the situation today, and what are the intractable issues, the Gordian knots, if you like, that lie at the heart of the challenge today? The main objective of the Heart of Asia Society webinars series is to bring out some of these critical questions about Afghanistan today, discuss their impact on Afghanistan, as well as the region, and explore possible solutions. In this first of the series of events, we are joined by three immensely qualified speakers to discuss these very questions. We at the Heart of Asia Society are very grateful that they have accepted our invitation to join us. We are also thankful to the many others who have signed up as participants and hope to engage as many of them as possible through the Q&A session. Thank you also to the even more a larger number of viewers who are watching us on live stream through Facebook right now. Okay, well, going to the panels, none of our speakers requires any introduction per se. However, for the sake of good order, I will say a few brief words about each one of them. Madam Fatima Gilani is one of the most well-known women leaders of Afghanistan who has been involved in politics and humanitarian work for over 40 years. And the recent Doha peace talks, Ms. Gilani was one of the 21 negotiators on the Republic's team and continues her effort to seek a political settlement to date. Having also, from 2004 to 2016, Ms. Gilani was president of the Afghan Red Crescent Society, having also served in many distinguished roles, such as the 2003 Constitution Commission, the 2001 Bonn Conference, and multiple lawyer jirgas convened over these past 2 decades. She brings a wealth of experience and knowledge about Afghan issues. Madam Gilani is the author of 2 books, including a great book on, it's called The Jurist Who Became Prime Minister, about the life and career of Muhammad Musa Shafiq, the progressive Islamic scholar who served as Afghanistan's prime minister during the constitution period of 1960 to 1970. Ms. Gilani has received numerous awards and recognitions, and we're grateful, Janab Gilani, sir, that you have joined us. Thank you. Ahmed Rashid is a distinguished Pakistani journalist who has covered conflicts in Afghanistan, Central Asia, and Pakistan since 1979. He is one of the world's most renowned authorities on the region, and his views have been sought very widely over the years by powers from east to west. Mr. Rashid is the author of 5 books, including Taliban, which was translated into 40 languages worldwide and sold 1.5 million copies in English alone. It has remained in print for years. His other book, Descent into Chaos, the United States and the Disaster in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia, published in 2008, has been translated into 16 languages. And his most recent book is Pakistan on the Brink, The Future of America, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. These three books are part of a trilogy examining the war in Afghanistan and its regional impact since 2001. Rightly so, Mr. Rashid has been the recipient of many international awards for his work. Ahmad, it's an honor that you're with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And finally, last but not least, Maulavi Saib Abdul Hakim Mujahid is a former senior Taliban official who served as the Taliban government's ambassador designate to the United Nations in New York during the previous regime of the Taliban in the late 1990s. While he has never formally renounced ties with the Taliban, Mr. Mujahid was one of the most prominent former Taliban leaders who lived in Kabul for much of the past 20 years, focusing his efforts on peace in achieving a political solution to the conflict. He served as a deputy chair of Afghanistan's High Peace Council at one stage. He continues to live in Kabul today. Junab Mujahid said, thank you very much for joining us today from Kabul.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
To set the scene and to kick off the conversation, I would like to go first to Madam Fatima Gilani, and I'll ask her, you have been in Afghan politics for 40 years. I've seen lots of ups and downs, good days and bad days. And you were the last negotiator also to leave Doha. I remember those heartbroken days when the peace negotiations were abandoned, and negotiators who were there with a lot of hope left one by one, slowly, but basically realizing that there was no point in staying and hoping for a political settlement after the military takeover in August. Now you continue your effort today and still trying to forge some sort of a political settlement. What do you think is the biggest threat now, and what is your biggest fear about Afghanistan right now, in especially the direction in which Afghanistan is moving right now? Madam Gilani?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, it is an honor to be present today, and especially with two speakers that I have lots of respect for both of them. It is 44 years that I have been in this nightmare. And I'm very sorry to say that it's 44 years, I didn't see good days. Not even in the 20 years that everyone think it was good. If it was good, it wouldn't have been ended like that. So maybe it was better, maybe it could have been good. The biggest regret that we all have, and I definitely have, is the opportunity lost. We spoke several times about what was happening and why we didn't succeed in Doha. We go on and on about it several times. So I'm not going to repeat that, but all I say that it was an opportunity for everyone. When I say that opportunity, I don't mean an opportunity for the Republic side or the Taliban side. This was an opportunity for the Afghan people. I tried very hard from the day that the last Russian soldiers left Afghanistan. I tried very hard, and I tried to explain, but at that time I was very young and people were not taking me seriously. But I was hoping that at least now people will take me seriously, to explain that without a political settlement, the war can be won, but the peace cannot be won. And this is exactly what I'm saying. So all of us, no matter what background we are coming from, we owe it to the people of Afghanistan that we find a way to and this is a time that there isn't no war yet, which I'm very grateful for, not to give an opportunity for another conflict to come. I have said this in our own meetings. I'm talking in the meetings with the Republic side and Taliban and the Republic side together. I've said it several times, that these are the opportunities that we will regret losing it. And again, today we have an opportunity that we all boast upon, that at least there isn't a war going on in Afghanistan. There is hunger, yes. There is huge problems, yes. But at least there isn't any war going on. Let's not start that again. And I'm telling you, if God forbid, a war starts today in Afghanistan, this will be the end of Afghanistan. This will be the most ugly and terrible war ever, even at the standards of Afghanistan. That's why I believe at the dignity of Afghan people, and I believe that the only solution is that people of Afghanistan, not with the encouragement of only the Western countries, but for our own sake and for our own people, we have to start a proper talk among ourselves.
But do you think the Taliban government is moving in the because they are now the government in power? Do you think they are moving in the direction that makes war more possible or less possible? And are they really? Do you think now, 6 months on, do you think you're seeing signs that they may be able to get a handle on the crisis that's going on in the country?
Has to recognize this, that the political crisis and humanitarian crisis are very well connected to each other. You cannot separate them. And as much as the whole world is busy separating the outsiders, separating the humanitarian crisis from recognition and all that, for them it is a little bit easier. But for us Afghans, it is very difficult to separate these two things. It is political. Every problem is political inside Afghanistan, and it has always been. So if you ask me that, are the Taliban able to correct this? I think yes, they are. I think they have this responsibility toward the people of Afghanistan and towards themselves, toward their own people.
What do you see? What are the signs that make you say that, to make you hopeful that they are able to do that?
The signs, I don't see it much today in the field because it is very easy to get too optimistic when you win politically, and I have seen it before. I have seen it with the Mujahideen. I was part of it. I was their spokesperson, and so were the Taliban. They were part of the Mujahideen. That when we won the war against Soviet Union and against the communist regime, we thought that is it, and it wasn't. Very quickly, a civil war started because no one thought about the people of Afghanistan. We all thought about our own politics, our own language, our own ethnicity, and all that. Are we Afghans or not? Everyone says it's not about nation building. Then what is it about? If we all believe that we belong to Afghanistan, no matter what language we speak, what ethnicity we belong to, what madhab in Islam we follow, but one thing in common we have, that we are all Afghans, and most importantly, we are all human beings. We all want to live in comfort. So that's why in that 1 year is a long time that you every day get involved with group of people, whether it is our side, the Republic side, or it was the Taliban side. You can see that like like the wave. One day, one side was welcoming and sort of agreeing on things. And little bit of politics will change. Then all of a sudden, this side will become stubborn and difficult, and the other side. What I saw there was that very little, everyone was very little attached to the reality of the ground. And we, the people in general, but especially the people of Afghanistan, we hate to learn from the mistakes of others or previous mistakes. The mistake of not seeking the opinion of people happened once, and it should not happen again until it's too late.
I would like to just ask you, on the question of Taliban and on the ability of the Taliban to handle the current situation, we will hear from Mujahid Saib in a few moments. But there is a lot of, your own involvement right now and the current effort that you're undertaking is basically aimed at putting in place some sort of a political process where the Taliban can include other parts of the Afghan society and the political community, what is really commonly called as the inclusivity agenda. Now, the Taliban may or may not be able to deliver or to open up, but what is more worrying is the fact that on the other side, on the Republic side, which you yourself and myself and a lot of us have seen, we basically have been involved in and are part of, whether we like it or not. But we have totally failed to really provide an alternative. There is not even an address right now. Who will the Taliban talk to, even if they wanted to talk? We have some leaders that are in Kabul who have very bravely stayed behind. Others have left. Now, what do you think will happen? Who will become the address to really then legitimately sit across the table with the Taliban? And if I may specifically say, are you aware that there is this whole suggestion about the Loya Jirga, the proposal that President Karzai and Dr. Abdullah have jointly presented to the Taliban? Are you aware of that initiative? But more on the general point about the fact that the political elite of the Republic have actually failed in their historic obligation to forge some sort of an address.
I lost hope with those kind of leaders that you're talking about long time ago. I mean, Afghanistan was in the verge of collapse, and they could have easily stood together and confronted President Ghani that you're going a wrong way. This country needs a proper conversation, not a show conversation. This country needs it, and these people need it. They didn't do it. What miracle will happen today that I will have hope? As you say, some of them, absolutely. But again, I've always given this, that the people of Afghanistan were rarely consulted to represent their own people. Any ethnic group, some person will came and landed on their shoulders. And this was a fact all along the jihad times. We would wake up one day and hear either the West has decided, or this power has decided, or that power. Well, good morning, now this is your leader, and don't dare to contradict. This is not the way. If we have a proper Loya Jirga, if we genuinely go to the people of Afghanistan, they will introduce whom they want to represent them. We don't need to name people for them. I have great respect for Dr. Abdullah and other leaders that they have stayed. This is our country, and we have to work together. It is not easy, but it is not impossible. We can if we go. Loya Jirga is not creation of one person or two. This is a tradition of Afghanistan. But when a Loya Jirga or Islam or Republic or any important name or democracy becomes something in the hand of group or one person, Islam is the religion of the whole Afghan people. There is no custody of anyone on it. We are all Afghans. Loya Jirga is our tradition. Let's do it, and in a traditional way.
Well, thank you, Gilani Saib. Moving on, I'd like to go to Mujahid Saib. Janab Mujahid Saib, you've also been active in the search for peace for a very long time. But you also saw, as your former comrades, the Taliban ran over Kabul 6 months ago and winning a military victory. I am sure, as you know, as a peace-loving leader yourself that has worked for peace, you were hoping that the Taliban would find the wisdom to turn that military victory into a political solution for the country very, very early on, because you were aware of, I'm sure, of the intricacy of the situation, the delicateness of the situation in Afghanistan today. Why do you think the Taliban have not yet managed to do that, and they still are facing challenges within Afghanistan and facing basically isolation from the rest of the world and have not been recognized yet? Is this, as Gilani Saib said, is this some sort of arrogance or some sort of pride moment that they all have because they won the war and therefore they will need time, or is this something that is really that the Taliban will never be able to? They may have been a good military force, but they will probably never be a good political system. What do you think, Mujahid?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد. Yeah, thank you very much. I do appreciate this good opportunity for discussing the misery of the people of Afghanistan and political situation here in this country. First, salam and greetings to Madam Fatima Gailani and Mr. Ahmad Rashid, and also for you and all of the audience here in this meeting. I think, first of all the Afghans as a whole, we have a responsibility towards the people of Afghanistan for bringing peace and security in this country and not allow chance for another trouble, in another fighting, in another crisis in this country. Especially about the leadership of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, they are more responsible, and there are a lot of burden over their shoulders. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, or the Taliban movement, this is the only group or movement who have the chance for governing twice in this country. I think they might have learned a lot of good lessons from their previous reign of the government, and to take opportunity of this new era of their government. So far, I think the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, they are working very well. And first of all, they brought peace and security to this country. This is very great task that they have done to the people of Afghanistan. Before, we were witnessing every day about 200, 300 casualties coming to the government side or the Republic side, and also in the same number or more than that to the Taliban side. All these were Afghans. Now all these bloodshed have been stopped, and this is by the grace of the Taliban victory here in this country. And the second thing, they are working very steadily and very well to the people of Afghanistan, from the one side, the politicians and the civil society, and also to the regional countries and the world communities. The first thing is that what we have the experience of several revolutions here in this country, especially of the communist regime in this country. They were cursing everyone and they didn't use very polite language about their opponents. But we see the Taliban, they are very polite about their opponents. They didn't use any curse language against them. Instead of that, I have heard several times that they invited all those politicians who fled from Afghanistan and they are living in the neighboring countries or far more in Western countries to come to their country and settle their life here, and their life will be secured and guaranteed here. About political situation, certainly they are working within the framework of the Islamic teachings and also within the framework of the international norms and rules. But you know that their government itself, it is a take care government. This is not a real cabinet, a real government. So they are working very well. And the first thing is first, their focus and their attention is towards the peace and security. Still, the threat of the ISIS is still it is existed here in Afghanistan, and they are combating against them very, very harshly. But coming to the point of opportunity that Madam Fatima Galani mentioned, Doha forum was very great opportunity, and I think this is still very great opportunity. And the Taliban, what they made their take over here in Afghanistan, it was not their choice, but they were forced to come to Kabul, to enter to Kabul. After the leadership of the government, they fled from the country, and the whole system was collapsed. The people of Afghanistan, they were in need for peace and security to save them from the chaos. But I can say that Doha agreement between the Taliban movement and also the United States government is still a great opportunity to be used. In this agreement, there are two things very prominent. One thing was the promise from the Taliban side that they will not allow radical groups, including Al-Qaeda, to be there in Afghanistan. And the other side, they will continue their struggle against the ISIS, and the Taliban, they are doing very well. And they do not allow Al-Qaeda leaders to give visa or documents to travel inside Afghanistan. I think the Taliban, they are working in this side. From the other side, there was some responsibilities to the United Nations and the United States government. That the Taliban government leaders, that they will be delisted from the all sanctions problems with the United Nations. And also the government, the Islamic government, what they promised in the agreement, the United States will recognize the government and support economically and call to the world community to support that government.
I don't think that
in these promises, the United States government is very fail.
Yeah,
they didn't do according to their pledges and promises.
What the Doha agreement, maybe we'll come to that later, because there is some confusion about what is actually in that agreement or not. But I wanted to very quickly go back to what you do say, that the Taliban welcomed others. It was not their choice to come by military force, and they will end the war. How could any Afghan be confident that the Taliban will do all these things? Well, first of all, it's a group that is 95% from one ethnic group. Their government is from one ethnic group. Afghanistan is a very diverse country. How are we going to expect non-Pashtuns to be able to feel comfortable and really trust? Because nowadays, it's no more the time when you say something to the people and then you expect them to believe it. You have to prove it. You have to just show it that you mean that. And also, I think telling people to come from outside, and come to Afghanistan, it's easy to say, but what about the people that are already there? There are arrests every day. There are people that are targeted. I don't think the Taliban have, they may be saying these things in order to get some sympathy from regional countries or international community, but to their own people, they haven't shown a good face yet that people can trust. And the fact that they are still targeting their own people on the streets and putting women in prison, there are 3 women that are actually missing right now. So what do you say to those, which is the reality right now?
I think in all these reports, there is a lot of exaggeration in their reports. I think many of the politicians who are living here in very famous figures in Afghanistan, they are being respected and they are being protected, and they do not have any complaint in this regard. Mr. Hikmatyar is living here in this country and supporting the government. Also, former President Mr. Karzai and Dr. Abdullah, they are living here, and some other leaders from the from different political parties, they are living here in Afghanistan, and they are protected by and provided security by the present government. And about some ladies, about those ladies you have mentioned, the Taliban themselves, the government of the Taliban, Emirat, they declared that they do not know about these ladies where they are. They are searching about all these problems to find. And with all these chaos and atrocities before the Taliban were here in this country, so during the Taliban government, it is very few. They are very, they have their authority over the situation here in the country. But we are in need for mutual understanding. The problem is the lack of trust and lack of confidence. And the lack of trust and the lack of confidence came because of the very negative media and the negative attitude from some regional countries and some Western countries. I think we are in need to remove all these mistrust and misunderstanding between the Islamic Emirat of Afghanistan and also regional countries in the world community. And there is a big chance in this regard is existed.
Well, will the Taliban will the Taliban accept a new form of government other than the Islamic Emirate that they have, if they think, or if it's proven to them that that's the only solution, that inside the country there is no other way in which all groups can be brought together under in the current system, and also if they know that the world will not recognize some sort of an emirate system that's based on the previous experience. Will they, for example, accept some sort of an election-based system where people can choose their own leader?
I think the Taliban leadership, they several times declared that they would work in Afghanistan within the framework of the Islamic teachings and also within the framework of Afghan culture. We have Afghan culture in this regard. You have mentioned the Louis Jirga. I think the Taliban, they are working in this regard. A very wide forum, Shura, or what kind of name will be that? They are working from the district level to the province level.
Are you aware of what's their position on the Louis Jirga proposal that President Karzai and Dr. Abdullah has presented to them? What is the Taliban response? Do you know?
So I do not know about the clear response to them, but what I know about them, that the Taliban, they are working about what a kind of shura, a kind of jirga to be represented from the people of Afghanistan, from district level to the province and to the central level. They are working in this regard. From other side, the forum of the government also they are thinking in this regard. So far, they didn't renounce the previous constitution and the previous laws in this country, and they didn't declare their own laws, but instead they are working in this regard about the constitution, about the laws here in this country. But as a whole, the Islamic laws, the Islamic teachings, this is the ultimate laws of the country, and they are working in this regard. And this kind of policy is within the Charter of the United Nations and within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is not against these international norms.
Okay, well, thank you, Janab Mujahid. We will come back to you with more questions, but I just would like to go to last panelist and request Ahmed Rashid to, now that you've heard the Afghan perspective from the two speakers, what do you really, I think what I would like you is, and I'm sure you have comments about, as somebody who knows Afghanistan very intimately and particularly have written about the Taliban a lot. So you're welcome to comment on any of the things that you heard from the two speakers. But what I would like you to maybe focus on is to just tell me something. Why is that there is this disconnect in the outside world about how to approach Afghanistan, how to, especially at the regional level and also internationally, there is no common approach. Every country in the region has their own relationship and some sort of a dealing right now, or some sort of a policy with regard to the Taliban. International community as well, even the West, there used to be a little bit of a common platform, but right now there seems to be a little bit of a free-for-all kind of engagement agenda going on. Whereas there is a lot of common interest. A lot of people seem to agree on what should be done about Afghanistan, but somehow nobody is coordinating. What is the disconnect? What is preventing that from happening? Ahmed?
Thank you very much, Javed. Let me just say, first of all, which is not news to Afghans, but they have been victims of great power politics for 200 years, even longer perhaps. And that has, as we know, that has prevented a lot of things for Afghan society to develop. And the worst period obviously has been the last 40, 50 years with the Soviet invasion, followed by the American support for the Mujahideen, followed by the Taliban and the involvement of the regional countries, Iran, Pakistan, in giving support to this or that group. So, I mean, Afghanistan has been a victim of incredible degree of interference and creating an inability for Afghan people to actually be able to form a coherent government, a coherent policy. So I think for the first time, some countries, at least around the world, are very cognizant of the fact that they should not interfere, overly interfere. The other, when you talk about disconnect, I think after the Taliban victory, there was a move by Pakistan, Iran, China, and Russia to perhaps give some kind of early recognition to the Taliban. But once they saw the reaction of the Americans and the West, I think they backed down, because they realized that if they recognized the Taliban and nobody else did, not the Europeans, not the Americans, there could be an international crisis or a conflict even over Afghanistan, which nobody wanted to. Everybody wanted to wash their hands of Afghanistan. Nobody wanted to get involved in Afghanistan. So we have a situation where I agree, there feeling amongst many outside countries not to get involved in Afghanistan. And once the Americans take the lead in recognizing the Taliban government, which may or may not happen, then other countries will follow suit. So this is the big problem that the Taliban face. It's a combination of having to improve their ideas of governance and stop harassing education and women and all these other issues. But at the same time, in my opinion, there are three strategic issues that the West wants resolved. The first is a political roadmap that we have all been talking about, and that is absolutely critical for any future development. The Taliban has spent 6 months and failed to come up with any kind of roadmap. And they're on the record to saying that they dislike the idea of a jirga because it is reminiscent of feudal period, and they dislike the idea of democracy and elections. So what do they want? We really don't know. I hope this Deloitte jirga process takes Afghanistan forward, but we really don't know. The second big problem which is, of course, is the economic problem. It is not going to be enough to give humanitarian aid and allow Western countries to come in and provide humanitarian aid. There has to be some movement towards reestablishing the economy of Afghanistan, the real economy, the banks, investment, exports, imports, etc., and the real economy, and most important of all, job creation. The real economy is absolutely missing and it's really not being talked about by all the big Western donors. Are not talking about how do they intend to save Afghanistan from complete disaster if the economy is not built up. And the third issue, in my opinion, which is absolutely critical, is the question of the weaponry that is now available in Afghanistan. This weaponry is hardly being talked about, although it is the responsibility of the Americans who left behind all these weapons and fled, basically. But you have now an explosion of weaponry in Afghanistan. Already there have been reports that the Pakistani Taliban are now arming themselves with American rifles, and that the Baloch dissidents who are fighting in Pakistan, Balochistan, are also armed with American weapons. I can assure you these were not available 6 months ago. So it means that these weapons are available, they can be bought, the price of Kalashnikovs has dropped drastically. It's a very serious situation, and it's not being addressed by those who are responsible for this. So I think there is certainly a major role for the international community, but the failure of the international community to nudge the Taliban forward in insisting that they produce some kind of political roadmap, and that also there is some kind of boost given to economic development. And there's something like the weapons and things that are happening. I think we will be in a continuing crisis.
But what is if I may follow up on this last point, Ahmed, but what is the leverage that, other than sanctions, which are currently punishing the people more than the Taliban, what is the leverage that the world can use in order to push the Taliban to produce that kind of a political dispensation, which it may well be, like we discussed earlier, it may well be beyond the Taliban's ability to do. The Taliban are very set in their own ideological frame of mind. Will they ever be able to produce a kind of political roadmap that everybody will be happy with? So in the absence of that, how could they be pushed in that direction?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I don't see the Taliban actually changing their belief system, their interpretation of Sharia, which is not the same as the interpretation of Sharia by other ethnic groups in Afghanistan. Yes, I mean, there's an absolute crisis. But I think if the Taliban want to continue ruling, they have to, and they want their regime to continue, they will have to position themselves in a much better place than they are right now. And they will have to change some of their practices. Now, as I said, 6 months have passed and we haven't seen very much so far. I mean, we haven't even seen agreement on a political system. And certainly, you know, if they're thinking of having the same political system they had in Kandahar, you know, the last time around, it had no reflection of public opinion in it. It was a political system that was authoritarian and dictatorial, one man ruling over many others, but it was not a pure political system that Afghan people could embrace and could adopt and build upon. So I think, you know, there is a long-term crisis because we do not see the Taliban changing their ways in a concrete manner, especially regarding politics and war.
Yeah, well, if there is one, just a follow up on that one, Ahmed, if there is one country that is widely seen as being in some sort of a position to influence Taliban, more than any other country, it is Pakistan, the elephant in the room. We would like to know from you about what you think that role is going. There was an initial period of sort of bravado and celebration that we saw in Islamabad after the Taliban took over, and but now that we've seen some impact in terms of the boldness of the TTP and the recent attacks by the Balochs, and in the very important issue of the security threat that's spreading, the potential for weapons going around. With all those things, it's understandable that there may be now people having second thoughts about whether it was a good idea to support this kind of an outcome. Now, what is really Pakistan's strategy for the Taliban? Why Pakistan? They've supported Taliban for 20 years, despite so much pressure from the rest of the world, mainly the US, but they were unable to get the Taliban to deliver some sort of an acceptable political dispensation in Kabul after they took military power. And what is it going to do now with the Taliban?
Well, you know, I don't know, but I can say that first of all that the authorities in Pakistan have totally misjudged the situation, and there's an enormous, despite having spent, as you said, 40, 50 years involved deeply in Afghanistan, backing one group or another, there's very little understanding of the Afghan psyche or what the Afghans want or need. And we've seen that recently because there are conflicts between the Taliban and the Pakistani border forces, the armed forces, etc. There have been conflicts on the border, and the fact of the matter is that the Pakistani groups which are active in Afghanistan and have sanctuary in Afghanistan, such as the Pakistani Taliban, some of the Baloch groups, and some of the Punjabi groups. The Taliban has done nothing to get rid of them, to send them back to Pakistan or to put them under some kind of house arrest or something. So you have an enormous extension of activities of these groups now, reaching a really dangerous level, because every day 3 or 4 soldiers, Pakistani soldiers, are being killed by these groups. And the Taliban was supposed to immediately accept whatever Pakistan wanted and is resisting. And the real thing was to understand the Afghan psyche, that Afghans are not going to, even though the Taliban that benefited from 25 years of Pakistani hospitality and become stooges of Pakistan. And they would assert their own independence because they're Afghan. And they would not be listening to the orders of Pakistani military officers just because they were now in Afghanistan.
Are you saying that the Taliban are now challenging the influence of Pakistan? And do you think that applies to?
They have to. In order to get credibility in Afghanistan itself, that is what they're doing.
Does that apply to the Haqqani network as well as to the other groups of Taliban?
Well, it seems that the Haqqani network is, of course, it's in the government. It's playing a major role in the government. The Americans have now allowed this money to come into to Afghanistan, which includes the Haqqani network. It's not trying to isolate them. So certainly, I mean, the Haqqani network are very much, part of the Taliban. And they have been the main support for some of these anti-Pakistan groups that have been, allowed to stay in Afghanistan.
Well, I just, we need to go and open up the floor to participants for their questions, but I just want to ask you one last question, Ahmed. Do you see some sort of a regional realignment going on after the Taliban took over power? We are seeing some, potentially China on the one side with Pakistan, for example, being close to the Taliban and attempting to win them over. And then on the other side, we have countries that were originally optimistic about the Taliban because they simply wanted the United States to get out of the region, but are now sort of getting some sort of cold feet and are not as positive as they used to be, like Russia, Iran, and obviously India, which was never very positive about that. So are you seeing that alignment taking shape and potentially influencing some sort of a continuation of proxy war in Afghanistan?
That's what I fear, first of all, more than anything else, is a repeat of the 90s and a civil war that is fueled by outside powers. And that is really the very big concern. And the Taliban are in no position to stop that from happening if it does happen. If the fighting is going to resume, if there are warlords back again in action, they will be backed by various people. Pakistan right now is facing, it's bankrupt. There is a very dire economic crisis in the country. It's not in a position to play the kind of role that it played in the 90s, for example, when it recognized the Taliban regime and enlisted some of the Arab states to help the Taliban defeat the forces of the Northern Alliance. I think things are very different now. But nevertheless, we have to be very cautious, and Afghans have to be very cautious about making sure that what foreign interference is going to come about is going to be on the positive side regarding economic development and education and other things, and not arming Afghan factions to fight each other.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much. Grateful to all three of you for those initial set of questions. Gilani Saib, you've raised your hand. If there's something very brief, otherwise there's a lot of questions that are coming your way anyway. But
it is very brief. It is very brief, and I think it's very important. We keep on talking about if Taliban have changed, if the region has changed, and all that. But one factor we should always remember: people of Afghanistan has changed. Women has changed. Minority have a different role now. We have to take this in consideration, that if we want to engage the people of Afghanistan, it's a new Afghanistan. It's a totally different kind of engagement.
Okay, well, thank you for that point. And while you have the floor, There is, we are seeing a lot of questions now sort of streaming in through the question and answer, and I'll try my absolute best to convey them to you. But there is one directly to you, Madam Gilani, and that's about the future of girls and women in Afghanistan. And the signs on the ground are of great concern. This is something that I mentioned earlier as well, but especially the treatment of women protesters on the street. What do you think about the treatment of women and girls by the Taliban in their future?
Well, first of all, I mean, women being allowed and because these are new group of women that they know exactly what are their rights and they know what they want. But I would have preferred to have a proper peaceful conversation. I would really like the Taliban government open the door for a peaceful conversation to listen to these women. What do they want? I'll assure you that these are Muslim women. They know exactly what are their boundaries and they will not ask for something. But biggest fear that I have today is, on one hand, we don't see that conversation opening, the welcoming conversation from the Taliban side are opening. On the other side, outside Afghanistan, I see that extreme Western way of pushing things. Majority of women of Afghanistan are inside Afghanistan. They are not outside Afghanistan. We should listen to them and we should cater for them and open the doors for them, for their education, for their environment of us.
A very similar question also to Mujahid Saib is if I, sometimes I'll probably mention who the question is from. The previous question was from Nilab Pajwak. Then there's a question from Thomas Rutik here. And Mujahid Saib, the question is, a lot of these protests in Afghanistan on the streets are now, are attributed to so-called Western influence. A lot of people think they did that because they're Western driven. When will the Taliban really accept that the actually society is very different? We do not necessarily mean ethnically or politically. It's a very diverse society, and not every dissent is Western driven. How do you think, what would be the signs that the Taliban can accept that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think so far the Taliban policy is very clear about the people of Afghanistan, the political groups and the civil societies, that they have the right to open their mouth and to criticize the government. They allowed and free media is working nowadays there in Afghanistan in the same level as it was before. This is a good sign from the government of the Taliban inside Afghanistan. Outside of Afghanistan, I think the attitude of the regional countries or the world community, especially the United States government, towards the new government of Afghanistan is totally against the Charter of the United. If you remember the very famous and herald speech of the President Obama in 2009 in Cairo, I will quote one sentence of his speech. He says, "So far, our relationship is defined by our differences. We will empower those who sow hatred rather than peace. We will empower those who promote conflict rather than the cooperation." I think this kind of attitudes of the world community, especially of the United States government, will not be working here in Afghanistan, especially with the government like the under the leadership of the you are reading the Charter of the United Nations, Article 2 is talking about the principles, and paragraph 7 clearly says, nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in such matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of a state. Forming government in Afghanistan and the policies inside, this is totally belongs to the domestic jurisdiction of the Afghan government. So if we are allowing the Taliban to form their own government, their government is so far in the community is the take care government. They are not in a hurry, and we will not be in a hurry. I think if we are patient for their policies in the future, the first thing is first, the priority for the Taliban is how to bring peace and security and stability to this country. What is the demand and the ambition of the people of Afghanistan for 40 years, and the Taliban are facing all these problems of the 40 years here in this country. I'm optimistic in this regard, and we have to be patient. Certainly, the people of Afghanistan, they have their rights to open their to raise their voice and to criticize the government in their policies. If there is no criticizing from the people side to the government will not correct their policies. I think so far the Taliban allowed the women congregation, women meetings, and the politicians, the political parties in this regard, they are working very well.
And thank you, Mujahid Saib. And by the way, a point that you made earlier about the Doha Agreement, Dr. Barnett Rubin has commented on that one, and he said that the Doha Agreement, the US has not committed to recognize a Taliban government. In fact, well, that's not what he says, but his comment is that in the Doha Agreement, the US committed itself to have good relations with an Islamic government. And at that time, obviously, the expectation was that that would come through political negotiations. That would be formed through intra-Afghan talks in accordance with the agreement. Moving to, there, again, a lot of questions. I'll pick a few that come your way, Ahmad, and perhaps by then I'll sift through some of the others as well. Paul Fishstein says that David Richards, the former UK defense chief, has suggested the international community should do the inevitable, and that is to recognize the Taliban. Can you comment on the wisdom of that, and you know, community respond to humanitarian economic? Why don't you answer that, Ahmad? And there is, if you have a pen and paper to write a couple of others that have come. I think there is also a question from Barnett Rubin about the role of Russia. He says that after the meeting that took place in Tehran with the Taliban, which included some representatives of the National Resistance Front as well, Russia has been trying to organize a similar event and perhaps even a Troika meeting in Kabul. So now that the US is no longer involved so much, is the international leadership of the peace process and getting the Taliban to speak to other Afghans, has that shifted to Russia? And there is also a question about Imran Khan's trip to China. And do you think Afghanistan will feature anywhere in the conversation between Pakistan and China during that trip? And finally, there is a question. Sorry, there's a bombardment of questions about India and Pakistan rivalry. And where do you think that? How is that going to evolve with regard to the situation in Afghanistan? Ahmad, over to you.
Thank you. Let me just say that I think that the regional balance or the regional equation has certainly changed dramatically because of what has happened in Kabul and the appearance now of the Taliban. Every country in the region has to deal with the Taliban, whether they like it or not. And some countries were expecting a more moderate, perhaps, Afghan government with which they could start trade and export import, and the Chinese wanted the road built and opening up the Taliban are not able to provide security and also provide some kind of government that does not create a political and negative fallout in China itself. I don't see much happening, but as I said, there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of shifting of priorities. Russia is making a dramatic comeback in Afghanistan, and it will certainly because of central relations, and the Central Asians will be very nervous about dealing with without the other necessities of good governance. Really, what the other big change, I think, is China. China started off 2-3 years ago extremely enthusiastic about the government in Afghanistan and the hope that that Pakistan would support Chinese efforts to exploit minerals in Afghanistan, and of course that has not happened. The Chinese have backed away considerably, and then they're waiting to see what happens in Afghanistan. They have contracts, as you know, with copper and other minerals in Afghanistan, and these contracts have not been implemented at all so far on the Afghan side, and they can't be until we have a more efficient and inclusive government in Kabul. The Russians have changed their attitude. The Iranians have been very quiet. I think they're suffering enormously from the effect of sanctions in the US, and they don't want to get involved. They're already involved enormously in Yemen, in other places in the Middle East, and they don't want to necessarily get involved again in a conflict with the Americans or with the regional powers. Pakistan remains a key supporter of the Taliban, and Pakistan is continuing to push neighboring countries and other countries in the West to recognize the Taliban as quickly as possible. Pakistan is not holding out the kind of options that other countries are. Their views on the on the woman issue, on education, and things like that has not been a very strong voice, frankly. They have been more keen on wanting the Taliban government to settle down and to open up the economic opportunities. Remember, the Taliban are also still earning money, considerable amount of money. They're involved in mining of various minerals, salt, gypsum, silica, coal, and they are able to provide some kind of economic development to their own people, to their soldiers and to their own people, which gives them income. But it doesn't provide an income sufficient for the population of Afghanistan as a whole.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ahmed. I'll just get the next round of questions, and maybe first go to Mujahid Saib this time. There is a question from Balqis Ahmadi, and she's asking about the cohesiveness of the Taliban. The question is that if the Taliban claim to be fully in control of the country and its security and government institutions. However, when you mentioned earlier, Mujahid Saib, that the Taliban government has said that they are not aware of the whereabouts of some of these women that have gone missing. What does that say about the control of the country? Something that I meant to ask you earlier, Mujahid Saib, and that is, this friction, the divisions that exist between the Taliban. A lot of people say there are deep divisions, particularly between the Haqqani group on the one hand, and then the Kandahari or the southern Taliban on the other hand. What do you think? How serious those divisions are? Do you think? And there is also, I can see that you're not taking any notes, so I will remind you later some of these questions, but I'll read you some of those questions that people are asking.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
There is, I'm sure you have a wonderful memory.
Yeah.
Sanjar Sohail is a leading Afghan journalist, and he says that the Taliban should really be judged by their actions, not by their speech. As a journalist, we are facing daily intimidation, threats, and warnings. It's a lie when they say that they allow freedom of media. So that would be an important point, following up from an earlier conversation. And there was also a question about the Taliban's willingness to fight international terrorist groups. There are reports about the fact that the son of Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. I'm not saying anything. This is just mentioned in some of these questions here. But what they say, how do the Taliban, how will they manage to break ties with groups like Al Qaeda, with which they have had a long-standing relationship, in some of the other groups as well? So over to you, Mujahid Saib, and I'll remind you if you forget any of these questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the big problem here in Afghanistan is the negative perception about the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan or the Taliban, and also the negative propaganda, not only on local level, but also in international level. I knew about the concerns of the Afghan people and the international community about some ladies who are missing here, and the Taliban promised that they will follow the event. This kind of small events is happening everywhere in any country. This is not a very small thing. And about the media, what we are seeing here, I think this is very big difference between the first era of the Taliban government in the present era. The previous time, you couldn't have TV channel, any printed media, even newspaper. Nowadays, we have very powerful TV stations, and the radios, they are working very well with no problems. In some kind of protests are complaining from some journalists. This is also something natural, and there have to be some kind of criticism about the government to improve itself and to adapt their policies with the benefits and the people of Afghanistan. This is something necessary. And about the differences among the Taliban, I don't think that there will be any kind of differences in different groups. There is two kind of hierarchies existed among the government of Afghanistan. One is worldly. Within the government of Afghanistan, the hierarchy is existed. In the other side, there is a spiritual hierarchy is existed. The command of the leader of the Taliban and any minister, any governor, it is being implemented in that time. This is not a kind of government like previous in the Republic ones, that the order of the president couldn't be implemented even in the ministries. It is not happening here. So I can see there is a kind of cohesion among different ministries here in the provinces here. There is no problem of the hierarchy inside in Afghanistan. This is my information about them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Got any question you can remind me?
No, I think you you addressed them. Janab Gilani said there are a few questions for you as well. One is Ambassador Farid Zarif is asking if you could just tell us a little bit how the Loya Jirga option would work in the current circumstance. You mentioned there has been an idea that's been floated. Mujahid says that the Taliban may work. That's number one question. The other one is a combined. I'm combining a few questions here because there's so many. Dr. Eleanor Zaino is asking about whether models from the Arab world like Qatar and Saudi Arabia could serve as models. There are Sunni Muslim countries with pretty conservative systems as a Taliban for their future system of government. And this is also saying that there's an earlier question from Lutfur Rahman Saeed who says that that obviously now the Taliban being in power, every system and everything has to be based on some sort of a Sharia approach. And in these other countries, things are based on Sharia on the surface at least. So how will that work? You've spent time in both those countries, in Saudi Arabia, and especially recently in Qatar. What do you think about that? And are you aware, maybe lastly, one question, I will also raise this with Ahmad later, but you aware of the detailed leaders and some civil society representatives and political representatives, and if you've heard, could you share with us any of those?
Okay. From the very first day, when we were talking with the Taliban, they were insisting on two things: Islam, which was acceptable, of course, for all of us, and then Afghan tradition. Loya Jirga is Afghan tradition. It's a very, very strong Afghan tradition. One. Two, I didn't hear Taliban the whole of 1 year that once they will say that no to Loya Jirga, and they would say that no, Loya Jirga is not accepted. They were just presidential election, yes, but even about parliamentary election, it was not a strong no to it. So all this will come out of a proper conversation. I don't think that there will be a no to a Loya Jirga. Loya Jirga is not against Islam, and Loya Jirga is very much Afghan tradition. Yes, Loya Jirga has been used, unfortunately, for the last a few years for anything. We would just ask a Loya Jirga for just to wash it out. But I have hope that Taliban will accept that. Model, we have to look into models in the Islamic world, yes, why not? But I would have preferred to have, to bring Muslim jurists to come and help us to form something which is an Afghan way of an Islamic way. And remember that all the constitution of Afghanistan, they were not a secular constitution. The constitution of 1964 that Taliban suggested in the in Doha, and unfortunately we didn't accept it. And I was very much against that. We didn't. I was pro accepting that. Is not a secular constitution. It is a based on Sharia. The constitution that I worked in, because the recent constitution of Afghanistan, this is not a secular constitution. This is a very much Islamic constitution. Whenever I hear, sometimes, not from all of them, from some of the Taliban, that they would say that this is a Western imposition. Absolutely not. They were trying to impose it because we knew that it will not work in Afghanistan. A constitution is a clause which will fit people. So the same way, there were things that were coming, which was total only Afghan tradition. And Afghan tradition not always fit in an Islamic framework. So we have to come up with something which will fit the people of Afghanistan. Let's not resist the constitution of 1964 or the last constitution. Let's study it and bring things from it. And I think, the ulamas from all over the world could play a role, as well as of the ulamas of Afghanistan. And what was the last one?
There was a question about, well, I think you've addressed the issue of Sharia and in a Sharia-based system. There was a question about whether Saudi Arabia and Qatar can serve as models, but I would like to share a comment that somebody has written here and saying being very rich like Qatar and Saudi Arabia would be an excellent path for the Taliban to take, but I don't think that that it's open to them. But if you would like to add a comment on that one.
But one thing that came out earlier that I, as a person who worked a very long time in a humanitarian field, I want to talk about it. And this is, I'm so grateful that there is no war in Afghanistan. I'm very happy. People are not dying in the streets of bombs and all that. But should they die of hunger? Hasn't the time has come that all of us, the Taliban, the rest of the world, and all of us put our hands together that it is very good that people are not dying of bombs of wars, but they should not die of hunger either. Let's address this.
And also they should be treated with respect. I think that's the other thing.
Absolutely. It comes. Respect is one of the most important ethics of Islam. The most important ethics of Islam is respect. And unfortunately, it's not just now. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, akhlaqiyat, the ethics of Islam was not taught at the schools. It was not taught and talked about. And this is the most important, the most beautiful part, a smile. Why a smile is so important? So this is really important that we will talk about. And then I will end up here. Without a roadmap from any government, it's impossible to succeed. If you don't have a plan that how do you go from A to B, it's impossible. And I would like very much the Taliban's government to start working on that. Actually, in Doha, they were much more clear about what they want than we were, because I was lost at what we want. But they were very clear about it. That's why I hoped that when they come to power, their roadmap will be ready overnight. That how do I go from here? How do I deal with hunger? How do I deal with all the crises?
Do you see the Oslo example, the Oslo meeting, as a good start?
Yeah.
There's a question from Nipa Banerjee.
Yes, this.
Whether there has the potential to be.
Then I had forgotten because I just had written Oslo, and then yes, it was a very good step. It was a good door to open, and a very open discussion happened, which I am not allowed to talk about what were said from the civil society or women and what answers came. But it was a very, very open discussion. Women of Afghanistan, civil society of Afghanistan, without having any censor in their mouth or throat, they just talked about what they wanted. And I thought it was a very good start. And on one hand, we criticize that why Taliban don't listen to the people. On the other hand, we criticize countries which initiate this. Why do you invite them? We have to make up our mind. Do we want Taliban to open up and listen to us, or we don't want? And I think that it was a very courageous act from Oslo, from Norway, and I think it should follow up, and I think it will continue. And I have a huge complaint here from the Muslim world, that we need the voice of Muslim world to come and help us in this issue. We need Muslim worlds to come and take some interest in humanitarian crisis, and it is very deafeningly silent, and it's not good.
Well, thank you so much for that. And we're practically out of time, but I would like to go back to Ahmed for the final round of questions, maybe a couple of questions from all the ones that are available here. And this is going to eat into the 2 minutes that I wanted to take and do a summary, but I don't think I need to do that anymore. Ahmed, I think that, well, there is a question from Ambassador Tadamichi Yamamoto, who is asking about the political roadmap that you mentioned. And the question is about what would be the right country or countries that could bring stakeholders together. Go back to the whole point of coordinate, especially on this question of political roadmap. And can the UN play a role, or should it be a Muslim country, or maybe a Muslim representative, and what would be and could the US be expected to support the role of another country in this process? There is also one question which actually could probably go to any one of you, but we haven't discussed so much on the economic side. You mentioned it, Ahmed, so I'm bringing this question to you, and that's on the role of the private sector, and the fact that there is a lot of anxiety about the fact that Taliban do not have the technical wherewithal, the technical capability. Apparently, there was recently a meeting between private sector leaders and one of the Taliban leaders, and they came away basically thinking that there was absolutely no knowledge on the Taliban side about any of the things that they were mentioning or the issues that they were bringing up. So how long can the Taliban continue to be like this, just putting religious scholars in charge of technical departments and functions? Probably not, but not a question for you otherwise, but since you're having the last word, could you address this, this as well?
What we're hearing certainly is that the Taliban are hiring a lot of non-Afghans to come in and help with the banking and
Pakistanis? Are you talking about
Pakistanis and others from the Gulf states, and they're paying them decent salaries to come in and help them. Probably this is out of necessity, but it's not a good idea in my opinion. Once again, Afghanistan will be victim of push and pull from various outside powers, etc. As far as who could, I think it's been absolutely tragic that the last 6 months we've seen no real involvement by the United Nations. I think the UN is the logical player. The UN, after all, concluded the agreement for the Soviet withdrawal. It concluded the bond, set up a constitution, and it's an organization I think that many Afghans trust as being fair. Fatima is absolutely right about the Muslim world, the Arab world in particular, that the Saudis and others had promised at the meeting of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. We have not seen that those goods come in. To see the lack of concern and the lack of humanitarian, and even frankly by China. I think China has sent a few plane loads of goods, but nothing. Countries are frankly not stepping up to the mark at all, and it's becoming, the humanitarian crisis is becoming a Western American crisis rather than something that Muslim states should be dealing with.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We have run out of time. There is so many more questions here that have come, and it's such a shame that we won't have time to address them. I just want to recognize two very quick ones here. Ambassador Ismail Aramaz, a lot of you will remember a Turkish colleague who headed the UN civilian mission in Afghanistan, is now Turkey's ambassador to Jordan. Delighted that you were here participating, and he asked a question which probably will not, I won't ask the longer one, but there is a very shorter one that goes to Mujahid Saib, and that is that will Dr. Abdullah and former President Hamid Karzai be allowed to leave the country, do you think? This kind of goes back to what you said, Mujahid Saib, earlier about, you quoted Article 1 and Article 2 of the UN Charter. Some of these fundamental freedoms, will the Taliban respect them, and do they even understand them? What's part of that? And but as I said, there's so many other questions, and a similar question about this Article 2 was also raised by Annie Fortzheimer. So I'm sorry that we cannot go over the complete questions, but just very briefly, Mujahid Saib, about this question of Dr. Abdullah and Hamid Karzai, will they be allowed to leave the country if they wish to?
I think so far their relationship is very good with the government of Afghanistan. They are in kind of some consultation to each other, and the Taliban, they are respecting their role. I didn't hear that the Taliban put any kind of restrictions or ban over the politicians or some others. I myself was working with the government of Afghanistan for 20 years. I was not in the lines of the Taliban. Last month, I have a conference there in Pakistan, and I went there to conference in Taran Beg. At the time, I didn't see any kind of obstacles there in the airport. So I don't think that there will be any kind of problem to these two respected politicians living here in Afghanistan, and their presence in Afghanistan is a great blessing to the people of Afghanistan.
Well, thank you so much. Once again, apologies to those of you whose questions we were unable to cover here, but it's such a heartwarming thing to see so many people participated and showed interest. It really is a credit to a wonderful panel that we had. And we couldn't have been luckier to have them on this first event of this series of webinars. Madam Gilani, Ahmed Rashid, Mujahid Saib, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And we will be in touch with you, with all the viewers and participants about the next event. And until then, we will take leave. But truly enjoyed this opportunity to be with you. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Thank you.